Hola amores, welcome back to my channel. I am back with another Cultures of the Americas video, and this is a request video as well. And I had requested that I speak on the Canary Islanders that came to the Americas. The Canary Islands are a Spanish archipelago in the southernmost autonomous community of Spain located in the Atlantic Ocean. It is one of 8 regions with special consideration of historical nationality as recognized by the Spanish government. Canary Islanders descend from a mixture of Spanish settlers and Aboriginal Guanche peoples. The distinctive variety of the Spanish language spoken in the region is known as habla canaria or Canary speech, or the dialecto canario, Canarian dialect. The Canarians and their descendants played a major role during the conquest, colonization, and eventual independence movements of various countries in Latin America. Their ethnic and cultural presence is most palpable in the countries of Uruguay, Venezuela, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and the United States territory of Puerto Rico. In 1402, the Spanish conquest of the islands began. It was not a simple military enterprise, given the Aboriginal resistance on some islands. Neither was it simple politically, since the particular interests of the nobility, who were determined to strengthen their economic and political power through the acquisition of the islands, conflicted with those of the states, particularly Castile, which were in the midst of territorial expansion and in a process of strengthening of the crown against the nobility. Once acquired, the Canaries were the main stopover for the Spanish on their way to the Americas, which came south to catch the prevailing northeasterly trade winds. Now, prior to the arrival of the Europeans, there were several indigenous peoples living at a Neolithic level of technology. Although the prehistory of the settlements of the Canary Islands is still unclear, linguistic and genetic analyses seem to indicate that at least some of these inhabitants shared a common origin with the Berbers of the nearby North African coast. The pre-colonial inhabitants came to be known collectively as the Guanches, although Guanches had been the name for only the indigenous inhabitants of Tenerife. Of note, the genes of Guanche people have been found in both the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. Researchers explain that there are 2 ways in which the Guanches may have reached the Antilles. The first being that the Canary Islands served as a source of white slaves in the first decades of Spanish presence in the West Indies, and that second, that centuries later there were migrations of poor Canarians to the Caribbean who came to work the land. Puerto Rican scientist Juan Carlos Martinez Cruzado stated, "A large part of the Canarians were mestizos, and they surely brought mitochondrial DNA of Guanche origin with them." The term Isleño, which is a Spanish word meaning islander, was applied to the Canary Islanders to distinguish them from the Spanish mainlanders, known as peninsulars, or in Spanish, peninsulares. Isleños was also applied to the descendants of Canarian settlers and immigrants to present-day Louisiana, Texas, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Puerto Rico, and other parts of the Americas. By the early 19th century, there were more people of Canarian extraction in the Americas than in the Canary Islands themselves, and the number of descendants of those first immigrants is exponentially larger than the number who originally migrated. Although almost all descendants of Canary Islanders who immigrated to the Americas from the 16th to the 20th century are incorporated socially and culturally within the larger populations, there remain a few communities that have preserved at least some of their ancestors' Canarian culture, such as in Louisiana, San Antonio in Texas, Atillo, Puerto Rico, San Carlos de Tenerife, which is now a neighborhood of Santo Domingo in the DR, and San Borondón in Peru.
Dice, mire usted, tiene estrés, atroz y azúcar, asma, colesterol, sida, gota, le han dado 3 infartos. Usted está desahuciado. Y cuando el pobre hombre salió a la calle venía el coche fúnebre y dice, ¡taxi!
No es broma ni es chiste. Mientras medio mundo insiste en querer ponerse a dieta, el otro busca la meta de acostarse alimentado y los pobres no han pensado en dietas ni en endocrinos, por eso nuestros caminos tanto nos han alejado. Canarias sabe bastante de angustia, llanto, pobreza y también de la tristeza.
¿Usted de dónde viene?
Yo vengo de Teró, yo soy Carmelita la de Teró, lo que pasa es que ahora no me ha puesto la ropa. Ah, ¿de dónde soy? De Cristiana.
Entonces ella es la de Fontana.
Sí, señor, soy la de Fontana, en el Josefita de Fontana.
Now, first, taking a look at the United States, during the 18th century, the Spanish crown sent several groups of Canary Islanders to their colonies in New Spain. Spain's goal was to colonize certain regions with Spanish settlers, and between 1731 and 1783, several Canarian communities were established in what is now the southern United States, including the present-day states of Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. The Isleños fought in the American Revolutionary War and the Battle of the Alamo. After the incorporation of Louisiana and Texas into the United States, they fought in the Civil War and both World Wars. The Isleños have been able to preserve some features of their culture, except for in Florida. Most of the Canarian settlers immigrated to Cuba when Florida was ceded to Great Britain in 1763. Of the Latin American countries, Cuba was most affected by the immigration of Canary Islanders, and their presence influenced the development of the Cuban dialect and accent. Many words in traditional Cuban Spanish can be traced to the dialect spoken in the Canary Islands. Cuban Spanish is very close to Canarian Spanish, as Canarians have been immigrating to Cuba since the 16th century, especially during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Many of the typical Cuban variations of standard Spanish vocabulary derive from the Canarian lexicon. For example, the word guagua, meaning bus, differs from the standard Spanish autobús. The former originated in the Canaries and is an onomatopoeic word imitative of the sound of a horn, wawa. The term of endearment, socio, is from the Canary Islands. The Cuban sauce mojo is based on the mojos of the Canary Islands, where the sauce was invented. Canarian ropa vieja was introduced to Cuba through Canarian immigration. In Puerto Rico, the first wave of Canarian immigration seems to have occurred in 1695, with the arrival of 20 Canarian families. Between 1720 and 1730, some 176 Canarian families, totaling 882 persons, immigrated to Puerto Rico, more than half of them being married couples and their children. Whole towns and villages in Puerto Rico were founded by Canarian immigrants, and the lasting influence of Canarian culture can still be heard in the Puerto Rican accent and seen in the cuatro, a small guitar with origins in the Canary Islands. The Canarians have contributed more to the Puerto Rican population than any other Spanish region except Andalusia, and Canary Islanders, along with Andalusians, were the principal Spanish expatriate community there by the 19th century. In 1501, the first group of Canary Islanders arrived to the island of Española. There was also an influx of Canarian settlers who arrived on the colony of Santo Domingo in the second half of the 16th century. By the mid-17th century, Santo Domingo still had a very small population and suffered economic hardship. The Spanish authorities believed that the French, who had occupied the western part of the island, might try to take the eastern half, so they asked the Spanish crown to send Canarian families to stop French expansion. By royal decree in 1663, under the policy of the Tributo de Sangre, 800 Canarians were sent to the island, with more arriving in 1700 and 1709. The Canarians settled mainly on the border with Haiti, as well as ports and strategic locations. After 1764, the Canarians were sent primarily to the Cibao. The Isleños were, for a time, the fastest-growing ethnic group in the Dominican Republic. Isleños contributed to the development of agriculture in the DR with the raising of crops like coffee, cocoa, and tobacco. During colonial times and until the end of the Second World War, most European immigrants in Venezuela were Canary Islanders. Their cultural impact was significant, influencing both the developments of Castilian Spanish in the country as well as its cuisine and customs. Venezuela has perhaps the largest population of Canarian immigrants, and it is commonly said in the Canary Islands that Venezuela is the 8th island of the Canary Islands. More than 14,000 Canarians immigrated to Venezuela between 1841 and 1875. Many of those who fought in the Venezuelan War of Independence in the first half of the 19th century were also Canarians or descendants of Canarians. Since 1936, most Canarian immigrants have either gone to Cuba or to Venezuela, and since 1948, most went to Venezuela, a massive immigration that did not end until the early 1980s. Today, Canarians and their descendants are scattered all throughout Venezuela. Uruguay ranks 5th after Venezuela, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic in the number of people of Canarian descent among its population. The first Canarians to immigrate to Uruguay were settled in Montevideo to populate the region, arriving in 2 different groups. The first group was established in the city in 1726 and the second in 1729. During the 19th century, more than 10,000 Canarians settled in Uruguay, the majority from the eastern islands. Now looking at the rest of Latin America, in Mexico, descendants of Canary Islanders were a small community, but their presence is notable, especially in the business world and in the tourism industry. Many of them would settle in the Yucatan Peninsula. In Panama, 2 Spanish expeditions were led by Canarians. In 1534, Bartolomé García Mujica, founder of Nombre de Dios Panama, brought a group of Canary Islanders to the country. These were among a few Canarians who immigrated to Panama in that century. In 1787, 306 Canarians arrived on the Mosquito Coast of Honduras. The plan for populating the area, however, failed because of the hostility they encountered from the Sambos and the Mosquito Indians. In Argentina, the number of Canary Islanders who immigrated was pretty low, with a group of them settling in the interior of the country and another group settling in the capital.
The roots that hold the people of St. Bernard to this land run centuries deep and across the Atlantic. In the tiny community of St. Bernard Village, these irreplaceable roots are exposed and exalted for, dare I say, their uniqueness.
St. Bernard Parish is unique.
I'll say this, that it's a unique history.
And unique is a word that's very much overused, but we truly are unique because only here in St. Bernard did people become Hispanized. Only here in St. Bernard did people embrace the Spanish culture, Spanish language, Spanish traditions.
The Spanish settled in Louisiana is very rarely spoken of. And what they contributed to Louisiana is amazing.
You hear a lot about French in Louisiana, but you don't hear too much about Spanish.
Unless you visit the historic Isleños Village and Cultural Center, where the last vestige of Spanish colonial Louisiana is not only preserved, it is lived daily. These are the descendants of settlers from the Canary Islands who came to Louisiana between 1778 and 1783.
La música, una de las expresiones más diáfanas de la cultura puertorriqueña a nivel internacional, no está ajena a esa relación canario-boricua, como podrán notar en la siguiente grabación.
So that concludes this video, guys. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!